There are 3 New Testament passages which reference the events of Genesis chapter 6, and all 3 clearly link fallen angels to the activities here described. It was also by means of the Spirit that Christ visited the angelic spirits in prison, that is, in the abyss, and proclaimed his victory. These are the angels who were disobedient in the days of Noah, at the time when God patiently waited, that is, delayed judgment, while the ark was being built. 1 Peter 3:19 and 20. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but plunged them into Tartarus with its gloomy pits, that is, the abyss, preserving them for the day of judgment, and did not spare the antediluvian world, but kept safe Noah as a proclaimer of righteousness, and the 7 with him when he brought the flood upon the ungodly inhabitants of the world, and condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction, reducing them to ashes, and making them an example to those bent on similar ungodly behavior, and rescued righteous Lot, who was tormented by the depraved lifestyle of those lawless men. For through the things he saw and heard, just by dwelling among them, this righteous man was damaging his righteous way of life day by day on account of their lawless deeds. For the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, especially those who in their lust pursue the polluting of the flesh, and so despise God's divine authority. 2 Peter 2:4-10. Although you know all these things, I want to remind you that though the Lord saved all his people from the land of Egypt at the first, in the end he destroyed those who proved unfaithful, and the angels who did not keep to their own realm, but deserted their proper habitation. He has imprisoned with everlasting chains in the gloom below, that is, in the abyss, in anticipation of the judgment of that great day, just as he did with Sodom and Gomorrah and their neighboring cities, for they all prostituted themselves in the same manner as these angels did, having pursued sexual relations, literally flesh that were inappropriate for them, that is, outside of the natural order. And so it is that they have been appointed an example, and incurred the penalty of eternal fire. Jude 1:5-7. Note that all 3 New Testament passages make reference to the imprisonment of fallen angels in the abyss, on account of their activities just prior to the great flood. Moreover, the second 2 Peter 2:4-10 and Jude 5-7, clearly connect this activity with illicit sexual behavior comparable in its outrageousness, though not identical obviously in its specifics, to that practiced in Sodom and Gomorrah. Finally, the third passage, Jude 5-7, is quite specific in stating that this intermarriage of fallen angels with willing human women constituted an unauthorized abandonment of the rightful angelic sphere, one reason for the severe temporary judgment inflicted upon the perpetrators of these acts. Although angelic cohabitation with human woman may seem unlikely, even bizarre in a vacuum, in the context of the devil's strategy to resist God's plan in every conceivable way, the enlistment of some of his more reckless followers to pollute and thereby effectually destroy the human race bespeaks a certain cold logic. This is especially true when one considers that the success of this operation would have removed the possibility of God's eventual carrying out of the judgment already proclaimed against the devil, because it would have made the birth of the promised Messiah, the woman's pure human seed, an impossibility. Genesis 6:1 and 2, quoted at the beginning of this section, leaves unstated the obvious background to these events. Rapid expansion of the human race brought with it an increased carelessness about acknowledging, let alone following, God and his natural law. Of this we may be sure, for it is just this expanding depravity of human behavior, seen here on earth for the first, though certainly not the last time, that forms the basis for a divine displeasure so extreme that the great flood becomes the only acceptable remedy. Genesis 6:5-8 and 6:11-13. These conditions provided Satan with his first major strategic opportunity since his success in corrupting Adam and Eve. Apparently prohibited from direct, outright destruction of human beings, otherwise he would long ago have taken this obvious remedy, and stymied in his abortive attempt to have human beings slaughter each other to the point of extinction. By God's prohibition of murder in the wake of Cain's killing of Abel, he now found himself confronted with the intriguing prospect of introducing a fatal disease, so to speak, among the growing ranks of the spiritually weak. If he were not allowed to give such a disease to humanity, and thus destroy us apart from our free will, Satan discerned that granting us an opportunity to contract such a disease would be a different matter. Offering the possibility of cohabitation with some of his followers would be an attractive leaven that would soon infect the whole lump. To abide by the principle of preserving human free will in the unseen conflict that rages around us, it would only be necessary to make these initial liaisons voluntary. The insidious nature of the plan was that this seed, once planted, would quickly spread. Although the majority might refuse such abominable joining in the first place, there would be some who would accept or even seek such alliances given the talented offspring that would be produced. And the situation would ever be such that a refusal would only be a temporary win for humanity, while an acceptance would be a permanent loss. Once the angelic seed was introduced into the human gene pool, sooner or later, every human family would become infected and spread that infection, always by choice, until at last there would be no possibility of a pure line for the Messiah. Despite its attractive possibilities, the plan presented problems as well. God's reaction vis-à-vis tainted humanity is well known, that is, his extermination of such monsters by means of the worldwide flood. Less celebrated, but equally as awe-inspiring, is his reaction to the angelic participants in Satan's scheme to irrevocably pollute the human race. Following these events, all fallen angels guilty of cohabitation with human beings were punished with the most severe penalty possible this side of consignment in the lake of fire. The penalty for not keeping to their own realm was to be plunged into the lightless abyss, 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 1:6, a terrifying prospect for these creatures of light, even in their fallen state. This awful prospect motivated the legion of demons who had possessed the demoniac at Gadara to beg Christ frantically not to have them confined to that terrible place, Luke 8:31. We may surmise, therefore, that just as humans are induced into illicit sexual activities in full cognizance of the possible repercussions, so some of the fallen angels were induced, no doubt by the devil, to take this action, even though it must have been quite clear that swift and sure judgment from the Almighty was likely to follow. Satan, by all indications, there are still legions of demons loose in the cosmos, was unable to convince all of his followers to act recklessly in this fashion, and probably did not want his best lieutenants to do so in any case. Nevertheless, the events described here show that he was able to find a cadre willing to abandon their first estate and risk the consequences that in the event did befall them. We have already noted the desire of fallen angels for physical bodies of their own, a desire the devil exploited to the full in garnering support for his rebellion, and we may see these events as corollary to that principle. The selection process of which Genesis 6:2 makes a particular point certainly points in this direction, that is, the fallen angels carefully chose certain women. Important as well is the fact that these verses betray no idea of force, indicating that the liaisons were voluntary on the part of the women involved, and, given the involvement of patriarchs in the marriages of that time, of their fathers. Genesis 6:3, the Spirit's restraint. And God said, "My Spirit will not strive with man forever in their sinful manner of life, for this is the way of flesh. Therefore his days shall be 120 years. The divine displeasure evident in the verse given, very odd if the two preceding verses were only relating normal human procreation, which had been divinely commanded in Genesis 1:28, follows directly on the heels of the intermarriage described in Genesis 6:1 and 2. Verse 3 suggests a double judgment of the most extreme severity. In a mere 120 years, brief by the extended lifespans of the time, God would all but bring the human race to an end. And for the progeny of those who would survive in the post-diluvian world to come, the longevity man had previously experienced, nearly a millennium in some cases, would be reduced to a scant 120 years, and this would be a maximum norm scarcely ever approached and only rarely exceeded. Even in such dire judgment, however, God's gracious nature is clearly perceptible, because for the one family of believers left on earth, that is, that of Noah, the 120 years were an important grace period that gave the necessary time for the ark, God's chosen means of deliverance, to be completed. It is ever thus that by the patience of our God we are delivered, 1 Peter 3:20. Genesis 6:4, the Nephilim. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and afterwards as well, that is, both before and after the start of the 120-year grace period before the flood. For when the sons of God went in to the daughters of men, they bore to them those mighty ones, that is, the Nephilim, whose names are famous from ancient times. The transliteration of the Hebrew word Nephilim is standard practice now on account of the clear unacceptability of the Septuagint's giants. However ineffective this parallel drawn from Greek mythology may be, the Septuagint's interpretation is clearly correct in the sense that it recognizes these creatures as not entirely human, as the Greek giants were not. By the time we reach Genesis 6:4, interpretations which try to make these Nephilim entirely human have run into a host of difficulties. In the verse given, the extraordinary nature of these creatures is directly related to the fact that they are the progeny of the sons of God, a mention that makes little sense if these sons of God were normal human beings. The etymology of the word Naphiel, Hebrew Nephilim is actually in the plural, is also enlightening. The root Naphal means to fall, and the Katil noun formation here is passive in nature, as is generally the case. Compare Asir, one in bondage or prisoner, and Mashiach, one sent or Messiah. The meaning fallen ones is directly in line with our understanding of the passage so far, for the Nephilim were A, fallen from the ranks of pure humanity, B, the offspring of fallen angels, and C, fallen in the spiritual sense as well, giving no indication of desiring a relationship with God, a conclusion to which we are forced by their failure to respond to his gracious 120-year delay of judgment, for only Noah and his family entered the ark. Genesis 6:5-7, the divine assessment. Now the Lord saw that man's evil had spread abundantly on the earth. Indeed, the underlying intent of all his innermost thoughts was invariably evil. So the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved his heart that he had done so. And God said, I shall wipe man whom I have created off of the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the crawling creatures and the birds of the air, for I regret that I made them. In our own time as well, mankind is universally disposed toward evil, because of the sin that resides in our mortal bodies as a result of our descent from Adam. However, the intensity of evil described here, evil that leaves no place for anything else and is untouched by any other consideration, is a clearly unprecedented state of affairs in terms both of the concentration and of the homogeneity of the evil involved. There can be little doubt that this rock-hard dedication to evil, which had become the rule on earth, was a result of the majority of mankind at this point being of mixed seed.